On today's Locked On Bucks, a wire-to-wire win for our Milwaukee Bucks, bringing an end to the 7-game win streak for the Sacramento Kings. Outside of Giannis, what really worked? And we get ready for another tough matchup with the Orlando Magic. Frank and I dig into it after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not yet, you can sign up for free at lockedondaily.com and get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Frank, the Kings came into Milwaukee with a 7-game win streak and an interesting team across the board by the numbers that some of the things kind of felt like they were fool's gold, and I think that was part of what we saw in this matchup tonight. But this was hopefully a get-right game for the Bucks, who offensively, by just about every metric, had their best game of the season.
Yeah, it's been a weird year in the sense that, we all came into the year, we've talked about it, right? We all expected this team would not have issues scoring. It would just be a matter of, can they defend anywhere close to the level needed to, be a 50-win team. And here we are nearly half the way through the season, and the defense has been good enough, I think, relative to what we expected for sure, to be a 50-win team. But it's the offense that kind of too often just has not been there consistently playing 48 minutes. And so, last year it felt like they kind of just got lazy defensively and just tried to outscore people, especially in the first half of the year. That cost Adrian Griffin his job. This year,
I don't know if it was just that.
Well, it was among other things, but certainly from a result standpoint, like the perception that like this team just, it doesn't have it defensively. And so I think tonight, we were joking just before we got on, like, a wire-to-wire win have been, a rare commodity this year for the Bucks, especially against a team like the Kings that has been playing really, really well.
Really good.
Moving on from Mike Brown, they had that huge win in Boston where they were down 17 and then won by double digits. So we know they have firepower, and especially with DeRozan this year, I think it's the first time we're seeing DeRozan with the Kings. We know DeMar very well. They can play slow with DeMar. And interestingly, that was probably where they were at their best tonight, was when kind of the game slowed down and took the Bucks maybe out of some of the offense that we saw in the first half. But yeah, I thought just in that first quarter in particular, first half, I think we talk a lot about pace in the half court, and how important it is when the Bucks are playing well offensively, how, the ball handlers, the dribble handoff guys, like it just seems like there's an urgency that just kind of comes and goes. And when they get stagnant, that's where, too often they kind of just, again, become a one-on-one team, guys standing around, and they just don't score as efficiently as I think we expected them to. But not a problem tonight. Again, just in that first half, I just thought they got into their actions early. It slowed down a bit as the game wore on, especially as you're kind of protecting a lead in the second half. I think Doc referred to it as like, I don't know if you saw it, Justin. He said something like it was like it's like a mental war or something like that. Like,
yeah. I'll have to pull it up because I transcribe Doc after every game, and I remember him saying something and thinking, I don't know if I've heard him.
Psychological warfare or something. It's like
psychological warfare, mental warfare.
It's just because, again, like you're just trying to maintain that lead. You're walking the ball up a lot more because you're trying not to like play fast and take shots too quickly, because then you can, feed or run for the other guys. And again, it was at times it was like, this lead is kind of, it would go to 15, then it would go back up to 20, got down to 11 at one point in the second half. But credit to the Bucks. This was a game where both teams shot about the same from 3-point range, around 40%. This wasn't a game where it was just a 3-point variance story where the Bucks just made a bunch more threes. They did a very good job containing the Kings' ability to get easy stuff around the basket. I think they were under 50% in the restricted area. And on the other, the kind of flip side, Giannis, kind of exerted his will at various points. And, second half got kind of like the Orlando game where he had, dunks got to the rim a lot in the first half. And then the second half felt like he really kind of used that mid-ranger as a weapon and was spraying the ball around, 13 assists, making plays. And whether it was Dame, Brook Lopez, guys made shots when they needed to, AJ Green as well. And yeah, I mean, just a really comprehensive victory against a team that certainly was playing well enough to come in here and win, and especially a back-to-back against the Kings and Magic, two teams that are good enough to deal you 2 losses in 2 nights if you're not careful. So to pick up this win on the front end with Chris Middleton resting, I'd say was a very good result. Gary Trent again as well, and so they got guys stepping up who maybe wouldn't play normally as much as they did, and a much needed bounce back from Sunday's debacle in New York.
The Bucks were 17 of 20 in the paint in the first half, and 18 of those 20 shots were dunks or layups. Like, that was the thing that kind of stood out in some of the prep that we did for the Kings game. And admittedly, I haven't watched a ton of Kings basketball. I saw parts of the Celtics game and a few others during this win streak. But when you look at the numbers, you say, man, they're like, opponents aren't taking shots at the rim against this Kings team. Oh, that's interesting. The further you dig into it, like, oh, I think opponents aren't taking a high volume of shots at the rim because they're getting a high volume of threes, and those are worth more. But I think in this game, it was almost the inverse too of what we saw against the Knicks. And I think that's just kind of, I hesitate to call fool's gold, but part of the Kings being the 5th best defense since they made the coaching change is Doc talked about it after the game. I think Doug Christie talked about it a little bit tonight too, in that when you're constantly taking the ball out of the net, eventually your offense is just going to hit a wall and they can't sustain, and that boosts the opponent's defense. And that was certainly an issue for the Bucks on Sunday. It felt like that was the case tonight, that the Bucks were constantly making the Kings take the ball out of the net. And that's what the Kings have been doing during this 7-game win streak to kind of help prop up their defense. So a credit to the Bucks there in what they were doing. And Giannis just feasting again against a Kings team that has next to none, or probably none, in terms of rim protection, and nobody that is certainly going to be able to slow down Giannis. Brook Lopez big too, especially on the short roll, as they were able to kind of find some spots for him. But Giannis, 5th triple-double this season, 50th of his career, 33 points tonight. His passing, I thought, was tremendous once again. And he had that behind-the-back pass to AJ Green where you were just thinking, AJ, you better friggin' hit this shot, because of the highlight reel pass he just hit you up with. That's going to be all for naught if you miss this.
Yeah, on the one hand, when the national broadcasts have had the Bucks this year, it feels like it's really been the last couple of years. It feels like we hear these announcers like, oh, well, it's really his passing has gotten so good.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, okay, I appreciate that you're trying to give Giannis credit, but I feel like you're also underrating the fact that he's been a major playmaker.
You're just watching highlights throughout the year.
Yeah. And I mean, he's been putting up certainly the assist numbers essentially for the entirety, basically since Bud arrived and even before that, right? I mean, go back to his 3rd year, right? He had those string of triple doubles in his kind of breakout season there, and I think it was 15-16, right? So it's like the guy's been able to make plays for a very long time. You could certainly argue playmaking came to him more naturally than scoring, which is crazy to say now, given he's a 30-point per game scorer at the NBA level. But yeah, it just feels like this year, and again, maybe it's recency bias, but it does feel like every game there's 1 or 2 sort of highlight reel passes, whether it's the around the back stuff, that no look pass he whipped to Brook from the paint down to the baseline for Brook. Kind of was like surprised a bit, almost bobbled it, and then recovered and dunked it. So yeah, I mean it's been again just a clinic that he's been able to put on pretty regularly. Well, it was that the Toronto game obviously where he wasn't scoring, but he was playmaking. In this one, obviously the playmaking again showed off in the assist numbers, and especially a good contrast to last game where 2 assists, just the Knicks just were able to kind of make him a scorer early, and then it was just kind of difficult the whole game. It just felt like for the Bucks to kind of kind of get unstuck in New York on Sunday. So, again, like you just sort of run out of superlatives. I saw he's now 500 points away from 20,000 career points, which is, a huge number. Again, granted, we're spoiled as NBA fans, like seeing LeBron get to 2x that, but I think what Giannis has been able to do, scoring, passing, just the defense, sort of like we take for granted, night to night. But he had another couple blocks tonight as well, and yeah, I mean, he's just the engine of this. And I said after the game on Sunday, I think the disappointing part of these two Knicks games is, Jalen Brunson and Karl Towns were the two best players in both of the games we've seen against the Knicks so far this year. That can't happen, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think any of us, or pundits, media, I don't think anybody's saying like, well, Giannis isn't as good as Karl Towns, or, I think certainly Jalen Brunson has an argument for being better than Dame over the past year, just given kind of the resume that Brunson's had. But the numbers this year, I mean, they're pretty much a wash, right? So Brunson had a monster game on Sunday, and I think just games like this just sort of underscore it all starts with Dame and Giannis, right? I mean, for better or worse, this is a really top-heavy team, and when those guys are the best players on the floor, good things happen. And it just felt like tonight, the Kings just came out offensively a little bit flat. Bucks, didn't necessarily give them a layup line early, but also, the Knicks missed, or the Kings missed some open threes early.
Yeah.
They missed some kind of close
Shots
in
at
shots.
the rim.
Yeah, Dame had I don't know, it wasn't a
block,
chase down, but like a
Yeah.
fast break block against Keon Ellis, which would have given the Kings a lead, by the way. That was important for maintaining the wire to wire win. And then Brook Lopez pays it off on the other end with a three that forced a timeout, as the Bucks kind of began to pull away in that first quarter. So yeah, I mean, it's a broken record to a large extent, but Giannis and Dame, they're kind of the metronomes of this team, and when they're playing off each other and working well, this team is what we hope it can be. And when they're a bit slowed down, or Dame has an off shooting night, or we saw a bit as the game wore on, they were kind of trapping Dame a bit more, trying to get the ball out of his hands. I know we were talking about some of the numbers we were trying to pull to see, what happens when teams do that. And I think the superficial stuff is not good. Yeah. And so I was a bit nervous about that coming into this game, because I think we saw last year Keon Ellis in the Sacramento game, in the game in Sacramento, where the Bucks got blown out. He really bothered Dame. And obviously tonight, credit to Dame, like Ellis was not able to hang with him. He had kind of the step backs going, he got to the rim a bit, and they really had to bring those second bodies to kind of take the ball out of Dame's hand. But yeah, I mean, again, as we say every week, at least once or twice, it's a long season, and it's so much of kind of getting to where you want to be at the end of the year, at least from a regular season standpoint, is just being able to bounce back from down games like you had on Sunday, and just being able to kind of wipe it off and move on to the next. And now it's the kind of different type of challenge, turning around 24 hours later on a back-to-back. How do you recapture and maintain, especially the offensive mojo you had tonight? How do you bring that back again tomorrow night against the Magic team that you've already beaten a couple times, but it's been with them shorthanded, and it's been a dogfight in both of those games, as we saw last Friday and earlier in the season as well.
A couple of things on Damian Lillard I want to get to, but you brought up the Magic, so we'll take a look at the back-to-back overall for the Bucks. And one of the things that I completely took for granted coming into this game, and was reminded of as we looked at the Bucks injury report. So we'll get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. The next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Hungry Root. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I think we all have this ongoing problem. You just don't have the time between work, life, and trying to eat healthier. There's this constant feeling of being stressed out. You go to the grocery store, you buy things you don't need, and then you end up with no time to actually cook any of them. Are you sticking to health goals? That's always a constant struggle too. But everything can change when you discover Hungry Root. It's a game changer. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all the stress. With Hungry Root, it is like having a personal shopper and a nutritionist all in one. They take care of your grocery shopping recommending meals and groceries based on your tastes and health goals, from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. The best part, every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. Quick, healthy meals that actually taste great, all delivered directly to your door. It is a huge time saver and makes healthy eating so much simpler. You're going to love Hungry Root. For a limited time, you'll love it even more when you get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/lockedonnba and use the code LockedOnNBA. That is hungryroot.com/lockedonnba, code LockedOnNBA to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/lockedonnba, code LockedOnNBA. Don't miss it. You mentioned Dame and how he was able to get going. That was one of the questions that I had too, in remembering that game in Sacramento. Didn't seem to be bothered by Keon Ellis tonight, and an efficient game from Dame, 5 of 8 on threes. You mentioned when the Kings got it down to 11, Dame hit the basket, hit the three to put it up to 14, and hit a couple of shots in that stretch to propel them back to 20, the margin it is. So he was good tonight, and you did see that was kind of the Kings' adjustment in the second half was, all right, we're just going to blitz Damian Lillard. We're going to try to trap him and get the ball out of his hands. And granted, it's a small sample size. I thought the Bucks navigated it well enough, but that's probably the biggest thing to watch for the remainder of the season is the consistency of these games for Damian Lillard. Like, you have Giannis, so you're not saying Dame needs to be a 30-point a game scorer every single night, but the efficient games, you'd love to see those pile up more. And the moments where the Bucks are facing those types of pressures defensively, because you're going to see it in the playoffs and you're going to see it against good defenses. We tiptoed around the numbers. They're not pretty. He is the Bucks. This isn't just Dame shooting, but their effective field goal rate in those spots is about 20 percentage points lower than the likes of, Steph Curry engineering the Warriors and even Zach LaVine facing that with the Bulls. So it's not where it needs to be. And that's probably, even if the offense doesn't by the numbers become like a top 10 or a top 8 offense, like that is going to be arguably the single most important part, is how the Bucks perform in those spots when you're facing that pressure.
Yeah, and it's kind of had me thinking a bit, right? Like the starting five, I think they came into this game. Again, this is with Ajax and Taurean Prince on the wings. I think they were like minus
It's not,
3.7 or something like that, right? Basically, they're like mediocre offensively, mediocre defensively, negative differential. Tonight, Ajax plays 14 minutes, -5, I think, right? Basically the only Buck starter who was a minus. Giannis was a +30, which is nice. Good for the Giannis plus minus stats, which have been a bit depressed this year. I think the more I've just sort of like watched this team, and I've always been a bit concerned that, especially in a playoff series where teams are just game planning for you, that, being able to trying to get Ajax out there for 20 to 25 minutes just becomes like really challenging because of what teams can do playing off of him. Like in the Spurs game, for instance, like I think the worst case scenario is when the other team is like a guy like, well, there's only one Wemby, right? But if a team has like a shot blocker or a defensive disruptor, then I think it's like really problematic because that guy doesn't have to guard him at all, right? And he can just basically double Giannis or Dame or, just kind of wreak havoc. The flip side problem is, teams that have usually a very good offensive player who isn't a good defender can hide on Ajax, and it's kind of hard for the Bucks to weaponize him or to really put pressure on him unless you're like having Ajax like set a lot of screens and try to do some of that, which again, I mean, I hope eventually he gets better at that. Like he has obviously some passing instincts, but the decision making hasn't always been there. But I think kind of like the more I've just been watching this and all the slow starts, I mean, it just seems like, look, you're just hamstringing your offense pretty significantly, and kind of the defensive juice isn't worth the offensive squeeze is sort of how I've been thinking about it. And especially on nights where like there isn't somebody for him to guard, like the Magic are a really interesting team to play against because it's like putting him out there and having him chase around Cole Anthony, like Cole Anthony can hurt you. You know, he can do stuff offensively, but it's like, is it like
Yeah,
worth
it's not Jalen
having?
Brunson. It's not
Yeah,
Trey Young. It's
which that didn't work either, right? He obviously didn't do anything against Jalen Brunson. So if he's not, if he's not like really impacting things defensively, and he's not like a playmaker defensively, right? He's more of a positional guy, which is okay, right? I mean, he does go off and get kind of, out of his area rebounds, and he goes in and gets like offensive rebounds and things like that. But I mean, if like it was just me like kind of starting from scratch, I would probably be starting AJ Green, and especially if Chris is not starting, if Chris like minutes wise, if he's going to come off the bench, and you got Prince out there, I would probably start AJ. And honestly, like I would probably play Ryan Rollins over Ajax as well, but the Rollins thing, there's the issue of him being a two-way. He's got a limited number of games, so that's a little bit complicated.
I mean, we're already close to it. That I would imagine something's going to happen in the next month.
Yeah, and of course, the something we hope is that you figure out a way to get off of like a DeLon Wright or whatever, right? Which again,
anything to open up a spot.
Anything to open
upgrade.
up, yeah, exactly. Anything to get up the roster spot. You hopefully get Rollins on like a 2-year deal, non-guaranteed for next year, right? And then he's able to carve out a rotation spot the way that kind of he's been doing at times when he's had opportunities. So yeah, I don't know exactly what to do with that, because I think in principle, like if the Bucks are playing their best 4 players, including Chris in the starting 5, and Chris is back to sort of what he was like late last season, then I think you can sort of talk yourself into like, well, then we can get away with having a guy who literally is just all he's doing is playing defense and like going after loose balls and just moving the ball and being a connector in Ajax. But I think what we see and what the numbers are showing us is that it's harder to make that kind of math work. And he was like leading the Bucks like a month ago. I think he was maybe leading the Bucks in like on-off rating, right? Differential when he's on versus off. Now he's like slightly negative. So I mean, again, these numbers kind of swing pretty quickly, but it kind of feels about right. Like it just feels like kind of teams are figuring out like they just don't have to guard him defensively, and that's not great for the Bucks.
I don't remember if it was on this show with either you or Camille, or if it was on the radio show, but having the same conversation 2 weeks ago where there's this large portion of the fan base that is so bought in and entrenched in Andre Jackson Jr. as their guy. And I get it. He's the ultimate hustle guy. He gives you the effort defensively. I'm not saying he's a bad defender. He makes plays. He makes plays that are also not impactful defensively. That it's, you take the good with the bad for a young player and what you're developing with him there. But the more I've seen it, and especially the fact that Doc continues to go out of his way to praise the defense, and it's not just lip service. Like we've talked about it on the show before too, of AJ Green and what he's done there. And it was even after, I forget what game it was. I think it might've been the Magic game last week where Doc had said, look, when we put him out on the floor, like we feel like we're putting a defender out there. It's not just some guy. Like this isn't Duncan Robinson that we're just putting out there to shoot. We think we're putting out a defender that can also knock down shots. And the more you see of AJ Green with this group, I'm not saying there isn't flaws there, because we've seen AJ Green kind of get some of the rub from Andre Jackson Jr. with those fouls of late, but it just seems to make more sense. And the numbers back it up quite a bit. When you mentioned coming into play tonight, the Bucks had a negative net rating in those minutes with that starting lineup. Defensively, it's just been okay. Offensively, it's been worse than their, overall numbers with AJ Green. And granted, it's a smaller sample size. Their defense has been excellent. The offense has been pretty good, and their net rating is plus 23 in those minutes with him. So it just seems like it makes more sense. And, what you touched on too is the further down the road we get, you just get the sense the fewer minutes and opportunities there's going to be for Andre, because of number one, once you get to February, it's basically 32 games against playoff teams that you have on your schedule, and important ones at that. But especially once you get into the playoffs, it's just going to be tough to have him on the floor, especially with Giannis. But outside of that conversation, like how many minutes can you play without Giannis on the floor anyway? If you're in the same spot of, well, minutes that Giannis is on the floor, he's still Giannis, but it's 4 shooters and Giannis. Minutes where Giannis is off, but Ajax is out there. It's 3 to 4 shooters and Ajax, who is nowhere near the offensive player that Giannis is.
Yeah. And it's been a struggle to find, like, playing with like lineup data, right? Like we've bemoaned it, right, about how like Dame Giannis are, negative, like it's not working. And so basically like the only combination of like the kind of normal groups that has like really clicked is when if you look at Dame Giannis and AJ Green, all of a sudden, like all the numbers we saw last year with their like good offensive groupings when the starters were amazing, and you could say like, well, when your best players on the floor, you were awesome. That's the case with AJ Green this year. Coming into tonight, I'm sure it's going to get better tomorrow when the data refreshes. But 123 offensive rating with AJ alongside Dame and Giannis. Again, not a massive sample, but it's 340 possessions. And defensively, 107.4, which is a 90th percentile. That's also really, really good. So plus 16 net rating. Okay, that's basically what you did last year when you had, your kind of get best group together. And of course, we haven't seen that as like a starting group really, because I think maybe AJ started like 1 or 2 games here or there, but that hasn't been the thing. And so it leaves Doc in this interesting situation because the team turned around its season when you put Ajax in the starting 5, but starting 5 has not been statistically actually like help a positive. So it's kind of this weird thing where I get it, like he doesn't want to make a change when it seems like in general the team's kind of overall like results are going in a better direction. And to Doc's credit, he's not like playing Ajax 30 minutes when the team isn't guarding, right? Tonight he played 14 minutes. We've seen that a lot where it's like, all right, first 3-4 minutes of the third quarter, crap. They're not defending this guy in a dogfight, right? I mean, we saw it against Spurs too. It was like, oh crap. They put Wemby on Ajax, and now like you're playing 4-on-5 against an alien basically. So wisely, bye, no more Ajax, right? So on the one hand, like yes, you could argue like us even getting hung up on this is kind of overrating the importance of these lineups when Doc he's not closing with. I don't know how many times Ajax has actually closed this year, right? Has not been much.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
But yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to turn this into like a hating on Ajax thing, because a lot of it too is just AJ Green has just played really well. He's defended at a high enough level. Yeah, he's gets into too much foul trouble at times. He doesn't get a great whistle. But again, like he with the exception of some of these like blown switches, right? Like he's had some high profile blown switches, but for the most part, he stays connected to guys who are coming off screens, and honestly, that's a huge part of defending in the year 2024 as a wing, is just staying connected when guys are running off screens and cutting and doing that stuff. So that plus just the ultra dynamic shooting, which is obviously a complete different a night and day thing compared to a guy like Ajax. But so yeah, I think this is I don't want to turn this into like hating on Ajax so much as like just saying like you've got AJ Green, and even beyond that too. I mean, I put a poll up on Twitter tonight, and it I think you have like reasonable options, right? I mean, Ajax or AJ, or I mean, Gary Trent's kind of been the forgotten man in a lot of ways. He's been hurt the last couple of games, but like Gary Trent's been like really good off the bench. I don't think you need to do anything different there. But if you got into a point where you started Gary Trent, like I'd feel comfortable with that. And then kind of the biggest wild card is Ryan Rollins, right? Who has started games as a point guard when Dame has been out, but he's really more of a natural kind of 2 off-ball guard. And certainly like he's shown the ability, did it again tonight, where he can pop up and hit a contested 3, he can get to the rim, finish with his left or his right. And defensively, is he as dynamic as Ajax? Maybe not, but he's not quite as big as Ajax, but he actually is like a better like kind of ball hawker. He creates more steals and blocks per minute than basically any of the other guards on this team. So so that's the positive, right? You do have some options. And so I guess the question is like, do things have to go badly? Do things have to go off the rails a bit to make a change away from Ajax, or is Doc going to continue to do this thing where he just sort of continues to start him and then kind of goes different directions? Because I think you just have these games where it's like there's just nobody for him to guard. Like tomorrow, like against this game against the Magic, like it's just kind of almost a waste to have him out there because he's not locking down Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or something like that. And then he's still bringing the issues on the offensive end. So again, I know I asked this question. Nate Jones, who of course, great follow on Twitter, he works for Dame's agency, like super smart guy. He was kind of making he made the comment, replied back to me. It was like, I think don't love the answer, but like, I think it's sort of matchup dependent. And yeah, I mean, that's always kind of a tough direction to go where you're not just, just have your group. But I can see that too, because there are probably nights where you wish Ajax would start, but a lot of nights it's like, just give me AJ Green with the starters.
Yeah, Doc talked about that a little bit a couple of games ago. Mention what he said. We'll get to that and the matchup tomorrow with the Orlando Magic, because it is going to be a very interesting challenge for this Bucks team and an important game for the Bucks for a couple of reasons we'll get into coming up after this. Well, after the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. Whether you're tidying up, cleaning out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. You can currently check out their wide selection of furniture. It makes it easy to find pieces that fit your style and your budget. And the best part, the free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items. Wayfair's site is so easy to navigate. It helps you find everything you need in no time. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's wayfair.com. Wayfair. Wayfair, every style, every home. Yeah, and just quickly, Doc had mentioned I've seen it done both ways. I have my opinion. I'm not really going to divulge that of which way I think works best, and Doc saying that. But yeah, I've seen teams kind of essentially go matchup based, change it up. I've seen teams just ride, this is the group that we're going to stick with to varying success. So it is going to be interesting to see if maybe it does move to matchup based, because this week, especially tomorrow, tonight, the Orlando Magic, as you pointed out, especially with Jalen Suggs not playing in this game once again, there isn't really that guy that you would look at and say, well, this is an Ajax spot. Toronto Raptors, same thing in that matchup. Hey, potentially Sunday against the 76ers, because it's night 2 of a back-to-back. And at this point, if you're Philly, how do you determine which of the two between the Bucks and the Pacers with a relatively even record is the team? Yeah, we're going to sit our guys against this opponent. So we may be in the midst of a stretch where it's, yeah, maybe now's the time to try something new. But yeah, I mean, this isn't a bash Ajax or point out all the flaws of Andre Jackson Jr. It's more just coming from we've talked so long about how the offense needs to start to see some forward progress here. And the best way to optimize the lineup is by having 5 offensive players on the floor that are still two-way players. So that's where this conversation is coming from. But the Magic, Frank, it is remarkable that when you look at the injury report for the Magic, and it's another lengthy one in this one, no Jalen Suggs. Both the Wagner brothers are going to be out once again. KCP and Goga Bitadze were both listed as questionable, so they may be out of the game. That it just seems like every week the Magic are without at least 2 of their top scorers, sometimes 4, and they're still finding ways to win these games. Like I forget who it was. It may have been Nekias Duncan that said, you look at Orlando and you just say, how the hell is this team going to score? And then you get 5 minutes into the game against them and you realize they are saying the same thing to you of, how do you think you're going to score against us? And that has been every matchup between the Bucks and the Magic so far this season. But the importance of tomorrow is you win that game and you win the season series against the Magic. So as much talk as we've had about the 0-8 against the Cavs, the Celtics, and the Knicks, the Bucks have only lost 1 game against those other teams that are bunched up with them in the standings right now, when you look at the Magic, the Pacers, the Heat, the Pistons, the Hawks, only one loss to that group and a chance to go 3-0 against the Magic. You're already 2-0 against the Pacers and 2-0 against the Pistons. Yeah, like it's going to require a different conversation on that 0-8 record, but these games in the interim are important to say we can't do anything about those three teams. We can win these series and win these tiebreakers and start to get some separation against these teams. So let's start by winning that game tomorrow against Orlando.
Yeah, 11-10 against 500+ teams right now. So pretty easy math, right? If you're 0-8 against the top three, that means you're 11-2 against every other 500+ team. And that doesn't include the win you had in the NBA Cup final. So if you include that as well, other than the best teams in the East, who are ultimately, you could argue, the most important ones in terms of like from a contending perspective, you're 12-2 against kind of the above 500 teams that you've played. Again, what to make of that? I don't know, right? I mean, obviously they had a couple games against the Celtics that they played close, which, again, if they execute better down the stretch, they could have won either of those games. Cleveland, those two games were even closer, right? The severely shorthanded first game in Cleveland where they nearly won, led, in the last 2 minutes and weren't able to close out. And then, of course, the game where Donovan Mitchell hits the last second shot, after we thought maybe Dame had won that game for the Bucks. So, yeah, it's again, kind of little things here and there. But unfortunately, like, some of these teams like Indiana, who we hoped might just sort of go away, are now kind of getting their house back in order. And, it's super close, right? I mean, really from 4 to 9, right? Let's see, it's the 4 seed Magic are 12 games back of the Cavs, and then the Hawks are 14 games back.
Yeah.
So it's a grand total of 2 games in the standings separating the 4 seed from the 9 seed, which again includes
like
Bucks.
3, even 3 to 9 is separated by 4 games in the loss column. So
yeah,
I mean, the Bucks, because of the tiebreaker and because of the fact that you're 2 back of the Knicks in the loss column, but you got to outplay the Knicks by 3 games from here on out to catch them. Like 3's probably not happening. Your ceiling is probably 4 for the standings, but it just highlights how important the games that you have left against that group that's so tightly bunched up are.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we came into the season thinking like, well, you really wanted to get to the 2 or 3 spots so that you avoided the Celtics in the second round. If you get past the first round,
Yeah.
now it looks like the Cavs are going to be the 1 seed, right? So again, does that mean that the 4 seed is like, could that actually be more appealing than being the 3 seed and having to play Boston in the second round? I don't know. I honestly, with this Bucks team, I hesitate to even like talk about second round matchups because like nothing is for certain, right? I mean, you're literally like a bad 48 hours from being the 9 seed, So they just need to kind of keep rowing in the right direction here. And certainly, you beat the Magic on Wednesday. That's
You're
a
back
big
to
win.
4th.
You're back to 4th, and these wins are big, right? Not just from like you get the tiebreaker advantage, but also, I mean, it's a double whammy in the standings because you're dealing them a loss and you're giving yourself a win, in one fell swoop. So, yeah, I mean, these matchups, again, you've beaten the Magic now twice. The Pacers are right behind you. You've beaten them twice. They'd be ahead of you, if you hadn't done that. You've beaten. Have we beat the Heat twice or just once so far this year? I know we had the one. There was the one in Miami. I can't remember if they played in Milwaukee
thought it
yet.
was just one.
I think it's just
in
one.
Miami.
Yeah. I think
but you
so
got the
too.
big matchup during Rivals Week next week.
Big. Well, I mean, it's going to be important, right? And then
Jimmy Butler.
Yeah. And then Detroit, you've taken 2 games. That first one obviously was a very hairy one with the Giannis 59 points and, nearly winning it, nearly losing at the buzzer on the Phantom Giannis call and all that. So yeah, you have to go all the way down to the Hawks, right, to find a team that has actually beaten you in this kind of middle group. And of course, after the Hawks, you can find lots of teams that have beaten the Bucks because you then hit the Bulls. You go down further, you see the Nets,
the Brooklyn Nets,
Hornets. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, again, it's like, you only have so much time to kind of dwell on sort of these kind of negative games and kind of bad outcomes. Do you know if the Bucks get the Knicks twice more or just once more? Obviously they've played
Just once
twice.
more.
Okay, so
Just once more.
just the one game at home. So the tiebreaker's gone, which kind of is what it is, as you said. But honestly, I think, you know, at this point, yeah, I mean, it's probably a battle for the 4 spot, so that you at least can hopefully get, you know, a home court advantage in the first round. But again, we're not even quite to the kind of halfway mark of the
Sunday
season.
after Philly, we'll be there halfway through the season. Who knows who's going to be playing in the game for Philly, and who knows what the rest of the week is going to look like here for the Bucks. But yeah, the last thing I'd point out too is traditionally in this era of Bucks basketball, they've been really good in night 2 of a back-to-back. I think they were okay at that last year, pretty good in those spots. This year they are 3-3, but 2 of those losses were in the first 10 games of the season. Like one was that Knicks loss, the other was the Celtics loss in your 3rd game of the season. So I wouldn't say I throw those out, but it was a much different version of the Bucks. And the only loss since then was that Hawks loss where Giannis was out. They were down some guys, and it was right after they just beat the Pistons to qualify for the knockout round. And I think we all assumed, yeah, they're probably not winning this game because they put in all the heavy lifting for that. So it's a spot where they've performed well, and they're going to have more reps at it because they got a ton of back-to-backs coming up in the next couple weeks. I think they have 5 more between now and the All-Star break, which is absurd. And it's one every week and sometimes within like 4 or 5 days of each other. So they're going to get a lot of reps at it. And the first of those is tonight against the Orlando Magic in what figures to be another defensive showdown. Like if the Bucks can find their offense against the Magic, I'm not saying 130 points, they can find their offense. I'm going to start to feel really good about possibly turning a corner here for the Bucks. The last thing is, as we wrap here, I'm going to throw at you, Frank. They had their season high for points scored in a quarter. They had their second highest points scored in a half, and they had their season high for points scored in a game. The Bucks, with the 130 tonight, became the second to last team to score 130 points in a game this season. Do you know who the only remaining holdout is?
I mean, I sure hope it's the Orlando Magic, right?
It's on their homestand. It is not the Orlando Magic.
The Raptors, the Sixers,
the Philadelphia 76ers are the only team that has yet to score 130 points in a game. Hopefully we didn't just reverse jinx the Bucks on
God
Sunday.
Help us if the Philadelphia 76ers score 130 points this weekend. But yeah.
An impressive win though for the Bucks, and hopefully it carries through to the matchup with the Orlando Magic. That'll do it for today's show. For Frank, I'm Justin. We will talk with you guys once again tomorrow. Another post-game show on Locked On Bucks.